Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, October 1st installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with our special contributor, Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson, our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, Scott, another week of Theranos.
Yeah, the trial, we've had our big celebrity witness in James Mattis.
Yes.
We've had, for the last couple of days, the lab director of Theranos, which is interesting because this is the man who said, I discovered that the machines were not working. And perhaps more importantly for the prosecution, he says, I then went into Elizabeth Holmes' office and told her. So that's a big part of his case.
Is this guy the whistleblower? Is he the biggie?
He's one of them, and it turns out, if you read Bad Blood by John Carreyrou, he was a character who was not named. He was called John Beam or something like that, but he's actually Adam Rosendorf. And after his testimony, during which he said, yeah, I blew the whistle, John Carreyrou tweeted out, so for those of you who wonder, yeah, he was this Beam character who I gave a different name to. So yeah, he was one of the apparently the very first whistleblower.
So what did he say Holmes's reaction was?
He's the first to talk about a reaction, and really the first window we get into Holmes perhaps being nervous. He said at one point, shortly before the launch to the public, where they started putting these testing machines into Walgreens stores, that he went in and said, we're not ready. And he said, we're about a week to 9 days out, and we're not ready. The machines aren't giving back consistent results. They're not ready for prime time. And he said on the stand she got very nervous and twitchy. And that's Elizabeth Holmes we haven't seen. Certainly not in the courtroom, where she's been very staid.
Ultra cool.
And also masked, so it's hard to see any facial expression. But even in the book, she comes across as really a cool customer who perhaps had the long-range vision, but the long-range vision that, according to the prosecution, she was not willing to give the product before putting it out into the public, which is why we're in court.
Have you gotten any indication through all this? Was the product fundamentally flawed? It was never going to work? Or if somebody had thrown in another $100 million and they had taken it and perfected it, would it have worked?
The idea that I, a non-scientist, got from the documentaries and the book and all the stuff is that it was doomed largely because a lot of the biotech and biology experts were saying you can't get from that small a blood draw all those test results, period, end of sentence.
Because you got a finite number of red blood cells and white blood cells. You're not going to be able to figure out what's going on in an entire human body.
Right. It was sort of a two-pronged process where there wasn't enough blood and the machines didn't do what they were supposed to do, which is why even while people were getting tested in Walgreens, you had draws from the regular needles, and we've all had blood drawn. It's many, many vials of blood, and being used by like Siemens machines. So you had the wrong amount of blood, and you had machines that didn't work, and the combination was just, it seems, destined to fail.
Okay. Because it seems to me it hinges on that, doesn't it? I mean,
to an extent, but
if it conceivably could have worked, she can argue it was just a matter of just doubling down until we got there. But if according to physics it was never going to happen, well, that's a whole different matter.
And I think we'll probably hear from some experts to say something along those lines. But so far what they're saying is, we were trying with these machines, and the machines were just giving back wildly inconsistent results. And, in the healthcare world, that means you're not working yet.
People, right. Yeah.
And so I imagine the defense may say, hey, it's, biotech, this takes time. But then why were those machines put into the Walgreens stores when they were?
Well, yeah, and that's step number 2. Even if you believe it might work, the fact that it's not working and you're actually putting it into a retail setting to deal with everyday human beings. I mean, that's unconscionable, frankly.
Right, because you and I have talked many times about how CEOs and founders and tech companies of all stripes have raised money before they really have the goods.
Yes.
And some people will call that fake it till you make it, whatever. It's just how Silicon Valley works.
Right.
But this is different because you're right. There's healthcare involved. There's patient privacy and patient results involved. And they did go public with this machine clearly too early.
Yeah. Okay. We also learned some things about her, didn't we, during the course of the week? Her lifestyle and how everybody knew about the affair, but nobody was allowed to talk about it in the company. That sort of stuff.
Yeah, and again,
I mean, we're getting kind of into People magazine
right.
here, but yeah, I mean, the woman's such a mysterious character that to find out anything about her is kind of interesting.
I guess so. Although, those sort of unspoken romantic secrets of an office happen.
Yeah, all the time.
And that's not.
Especially when it's the boss. No one's going to bring it up.
Right. And no one's going to think, hey, we're going to go to court because of this. But ultimately, what we seem to be learning, not of gee, she was trying veganism or anything. That to me is,
yeah,
ancillary at best. But the idea that these two, Holmes and Balwani, are so estranged now that their trials have to be separated.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that means that Balwani cannot be called as a witness in the Holmes trial or vice versa. I don't know.
I would think he still could.
I imagine anything goes, and that would be an interesting moment. But because they're both pointing the fingers at each other, the judge has ruled their trials have to be separate.
Sure.
Which means.
But don't we have people they take guys out of jail that committed a crime together and have them give testimony against each other?
That's true. So maybe
usually
we'll see.
Try to get a lighter sentence.
Yeah, and certainly these text messages are not doing any of them any favors.
No.
But that's the nature of, and as much as they've been flying around social media, they are private. Do they say anything about the company? I don't know. They say they work together. They say that one might have been a little more flowery in her prose than the other. But really, anything private doesn't speak to lying to investors or anything like that.
Right, but there's going to be a huge demand for it. That stuff always makes me uncomfortable to read.
Right, and I guess they could always bring some out that say, now we're going to lie to investors or whatever. I mean.
Yeah, well, if they ever do that moment, yeah, sure.
Right. So be careful about what you text everybody because you never know when it may be used.
Okay, we're literally, this is the third week in a row. We have the two main topics are the same thing. Facebook. Okay, now Facebook is going to pause on its Instagram for kids. Now, pause is a very loaded term because this is what Facebook has always done. These guys are relentless. They've decided they're going to do something, and yeah, if the population turns against them, if the federal government turns against them, they'll stop. They'll pause, but they're still going to do it. They're going to try this. And we know from the Wall Street Journal yesterday, they've been working on this. They've been wanting Instagram for kids forever.
Yeah, we've heard about Instagram for kids for a while, and you're right. Pause is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. But one thing that we do know is Facebook is responding to the tremendous blowback of what we've been talking about, the Wall Street Journal series on them. And in this case in particular, I had this discussion with our anchor Raj Mathai. He said, I have a tween at home, and I was kind of worried about this. And I said, Raj, I have a teen at home, and I'm the one that's telling you, worry about this.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that going on where people with younger kids are hearing from people with teenagers and thinking, okay, Instagram is something I'm going to have to deal with in the future. But if you're 10 and your kid's on Instagram, all of a sudden you're dealing with it right now, and that has parents concerned.
And you may not even know because you bought your kid a phone for safety's sake, and they can do a lot of things with that phone.
Yes, I mean right, and I fall right into that category. And I
mean, my kids when they're in elementary school had stories of going into the computer lab and looking up stuff. I mean, it's hard to stop once you put the instrument into their hands.
Right.
And giving a 9-year-old.
Well, it'd be
access.
10 to 12.
10 and 12. Well, so they say.
Right.
They're going to keep going.
Well, and a lot of the research.
Baby.
Right. And a lot of the research shows that plenty
TikTok.
of under 13-year-olds are on Instagram right now.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So for Facebook to say, hey, we've got something for your tweens, it won't have advertising, we'll get parental involvement. I don't know. I'm not worried about the advertising as someone who's been through
I'm not
this.
either. But,
right.
I the safeguards.
Right.
there are bright kids who will devote their lives to getting around those safeguards and then sharing with everybody else.
Yeah, and it's the sharing. We talked about this on earlier versions of your podcast, where if your teenager, or in this case tween, has a very small group of friends that he or she communicates with, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a social tool, especially during a time of pandemic. But when it's so wide open, and we know that that's Facebook's problem and Instagram's problem, anything goes and anything can sneak in.
And tomorrow the whole school could turn on your kid.
Right. And there's, again, no real solution to this because the platform is just so incredibly big.
Yeah.
But if anything, the idea that Facebook is willing to listen to the pitchforked mob and say, okay, well, we will pause this, whatever that means. Instagram for kids, I've gone on the record as saying is a bad idea. I'm whatever. So if they pause it, it means good. There's a little bit of time when maybe some kids out there won't yet be.
Or your kid could grow out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to think, is there nobody in that company that says, hey, this might not be a good idea socially? But apparently there are. It's just that they're real good at hiding those inter-office emails.
They're getting less good at that.
Yeah.
And what we've seen with some of these companies, first it was Google, then Facebook, even Apple, companies where people are, let's admit it, they're already wealthy, right?
Yeah.
And so they have a little bit of freedom to say, hold up, I don't agree with our direction. We've seen that with those three companies that I just named. Also, I'd throw YouTube in there as its own entity. As people saying, as employees saying, I really disagree with the direction we're going. And I don't know if that has as much weight as, a Wall Street Journal expose that really blows back into your face. But if these founders are smart, they would listen to these people. These are the really smart people who are wealthy enough to say, you know what, I'm going to risk my job here. But
Right.
I'm really smart. I developed this, and we're getting to a point where I disagree. That should be listened to internally.
Yeah, but how many tech companies do you know when they discover they have a new thing that might have consequences, say no? This is the Meiji Dynasty where they say no guns. We're not going to accept firearms. We're going to stick with swords. This is a tech company saying we got a new product that could make us $30 billion.
Right.
Do they ever say no?
Very rarely, and there are companies that have sort of, seen it both ways. I mean, I think of Salesforce.
Yeah.
When some of the internal, gossip got around to saying, hey, men are being paid more than women for the same job. Mark Benioff, to his credit, admitted it and said, we're going to fix this and make the pay equity. But at the same time, some of those same employees were saying, hey, I disagree with these government contracts,
Yeah.
Because they're helping the Border Patrol or whatever with their software. And that didn't stop. So it's a fine line. Sometimes you say yes, and I guess sometimes, like you just said, you say, well, it's bringing in a lot of money.
Right. And you can justify it. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my shareholders.
Right.
Okay. Well, Facebook at least is on notice now that you have the most powerful business newspaper in America, in the world, and they're watching you. We'll see if that changes their behavior.
It's no secret. Facebook being hit hard by the Wall Street Journal at a time when we're looking at the Theranos case. And how did we get there? The Wall Street Journal. So good for them.
Yeah. And Facebook doesn't seem to be afraid of the United States government, but I think they're afraid of the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. Okay. And we have a new entry into our weekly thing. Amazon announces its new tracking robot, Astro. I assume that's after the Jetsons dog, right?
That's the only Astro I know of.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to so it wasn't bad enough you're going to have a box in the corner listening to you, but now you're going to have a robot following you around the house and listening to you.
This is like what we've talked about with Facebook, how they just won't stop, even in the face of criticism. Amazon's, like you say, box in the corner, but, not only the Echo, the Ring, these are surveillance devices, essentially. And we're not just satisfied surveilling our neighbors or our voices. We're now going to have a robot follow people around the house. Come on.
What if they're quiet? What if you're talking, having a serious conversation with your spouse about something in one room, and you step out of that room in the next room, and the robot's just behind the door?
This has been used in a million movies.
Yeah.
Where, let's say, the Russian agents, they turn on the radio when they have their conversation.
Yeah.
Right? because they don't want whatever government that's bugging the house to hear. That's a trope in mysteries and
So are we gonna? Is a new addition to every home the hot new uh, item for homes is going to be a Faraday cage somewhere in the house where you when you want to have a private conversation, you step in there and you put an electric field around you.
But meanwhile, your little Astro has rolled up to it.
Yeah, what?
It's a very small little robot with a screen,
You
and
won't even notice it.
It's a
And
surveillance
so
device.
then the next step is Hal, which is actually looking at your mouth move and reading you through a window.
I mean, look, I know Amazon wants to make it super easy to buy things, and so you can tell your Echo, in addition to saying, "Hey Echo, play Beyonce," you can say, "Echo, buy this."
Yeah.
The Ring, a surveillance device, can't quite figure out how that. I mean, they bought that company, but this is following you around the house. Do we need to buy things that conveniently and that badly that we are willing to give up our privacy literally every minute that we're at home? I have trouble with
I
that.
mean, my cat's already smarter than I am. And, it makes me nervous having him following me around sometimes.
Astro is smarter than we are too, I think.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, IPOs. This is interesting. I just read this yesterday. In the first 3 quarters of this year, we had more IPOs than in the first 9 months of the year. We had more IPOs since the dot-com bubble of 2000. Now, I don't think quite as many, but we're getting up there. This is kind of amazing. Things slowed a little bit this summer, but now they're back. I think we have 14 IPOs this week.
Yeah, it's a
I love your
huge-
phrase, frothy.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's a phrase that was used back in the dot-com boom days.
But it reminds me of scum on top of something you're boiling, and the froth comes to the top and you scrape it off.
Hadn't thought of it that way, but think about it. We even have more ways that companies are going public now than just a generation ago. They're going IPO the traditional way.
Sure.
They're going direct listings. We've seen that with like Spotify.
Absolutely.
I think Warby Parker, the eyeglass company,
Right, just went.
had and a very successful direct listing. But also obviously the SPACs,
SPACs.
which are
They're kind of in decline though, aren't they?
a little bit,
Yeah.
but they've made it easier to go public.
Yes.
With less scrutiny, and people are taking advantage of that. So the idea of the public markets as a way to raise a whole lot of money very quickly has long been attractive, and it's super attractive to companies right now.
It's kind of interesting that a lot of these IPOs are taking place in other countries. Apparently, Russia is going into an IPO boom right now, and all over the world. I mean, I was impressed. India, very international. So if Evergrande, the concern is if Evergrande collapses, does it kill the whole IPO trend?
I don't know. Remember in 2008, and this is a company that's into housing and development and all that, and we saw that happen here with our housing market that got frothy, if you will, and it really was felt all across the globe. A lot of these companies and everything backed off, VCs backed off, everybody got scared. It led to a huge recession. I don't know if one company can do that, but again, the world is flat, and if that development company, which is apparently what, hundreds of billions of dollars in debt or something crazy,
300 billion.
That's
was the last thing
amazing.
I read. It's probably more than that.
That's amazing. And when that happens,
Yeah.
it shines a light on what is underneath the log, and we see that a lot of companies are doing this, and it often leads to a domino effect. So we're hot right now in the IPO market.
Yeah.
People are speculative. There's some money on the sidelines. They're willing to take risk, but that could turn around really quickly if
Really
something
quickly.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be a tsunami. We had a total, I should put out some numbers here, 2,000 IPOs to date this year, a record high around the world, raised a combined $421 billion. And that includes 486 SPACs worth 127 billion. And this quarter, the biggest IPOs were Robinhood at 2.1 billion, and the Korean software company Krafton, which I think set the record at 3.7 billion. And the largest one of the year so far is Tencent, which was 5.4 billion. These are big IPOs.
They really are, and again, it is global. We're starting to see a lot of these other countries saying, look at that model that is happening in the United States,
Yeah.
that's happening in Israel, that's happening in India, that's happening in parts of Europe, where we're attracting good talent because of stock options.
Yes.
And the idea of giving people equity, not just investors, and not just management, and that makes the IPO a very attractive, I don't know if you'd call it an exit, but a very attractive payout mechanism for a lot of companies.
I love IPOs because of the distribution of wealth.
Right.
You know, I love seeing secretaries and, receptionists and low-level, engineers getting a piece of the action. I think that's a wonderful thing. I mean, we had this interval after 2001 where they started changing all the regulations and keeping the stock options more tightly bound to management and not being able to share it. And that struck me as absolutely, anti-capitalist. And it's starting to loosen up a little more, mainly because of these kids in basements and everything else. They're creating this sort of army of David's pressure, and I love that. And that's a little that was a nice little segue to TikTok traders. This is really interesting. Did you read this?
Yes.
That we have outsider insider traders, and what they are doing is they're looking at. I read this terrific piece. It was hilarious because they ended it by saying, "Now remember, the best advice is always to do your own research." But the inside information is they're basically saying, "Okay, we know everybody in Congress is corrupt, and they're probably all doing insider trading, and by law, they're required to list all of their trades. So let's create an index on, say, Nancy Pelosi's stock trades, and that'll be our investment model."
Look, that's research. That's not really insider trading because all this stuff is public. It's insider trading if I know something that people don't and I tell you or I trade on that information. But if something is made public because of disclosure laws, even if it's what people are doing kind of under the table, is that really insider trading, or is that just someone saying, "Hey, I'm moving away from the message boards. It used to be Yahoo, and now it's Reddit."
It's perfectly legitimate.
Yeah, and because
but
of
it's based upon the notion that Congress people and senators are so corrupt. They're always doing insider trading because they always have inside details on various new laws emerging and private secret congressional testimony and all that. And we have examples from the past of them getting rich doing this stuff.
Right.
So let's follow them.
I mean, that's sort of the next, and it's funny, I hadn't heard the term outsider insider trading, but when I saw that, I'm like, I have to read about this. And it is kind of fascinating. And remember, and there's just been
I kind of love these kids. I really do.
I do too. And they got involved in say, the GameStop craziness because they wanted to beat back Wall Street and beat back the short sellers, et cetera. Now, they're risking their own money, which I would never tell a young person to do on a speculative stock. But the fact that they did it really did change things.
Yes, it
and
did.
It put some of those hedge funds and short sellers on notice. Now the idea is taking that and saying, okay, where do we turn our research? Well, hey, the elite class that gets to perhaps even break laws, but then we find out about it because of public disclosure laws, and we can do the same thing.
It puts politicians on notice.
Right.
I love it because you have a congressman from, I don't know, Indiana. He's got some inside knowledge that ConAgra is going to make a big investment. He goes out and buys some stock ahead of time. He gets his wife to do it.
Which, by the way, is insider trading. That's
insider
illegal.
trading. That is absolutely. Which is why you and I can't own stock, or at least I could now. But when I was a newspaper man, and you can't buy stock in Silicon Valley.
Right.
Will they think twice now before buying that stock if they go, what if those TikTok kids get wind of this and all of a sudden ConAgra stock jumps and there's an investigation on why it did and they trace this back to me?
Yes.
I'm in trouble.
Ask some kid on a Reddit message board, why did you buy that obscure stock? Oh, well, the congressperson did.
Yeah.
Oops.
There you are. The interesting thing is, even congresspeople don't usually get it right. They actually have, if you study their stock purchases, they actually do worse than the market.
That's a good point too, and that's why all this stuff is so risky, no matter how you're looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, but I love it. I love giving sunlight into all this stuff. It makes the world a better place. Okay, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage. as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Welcome to October. Bye-bye.